I am Jenna Quinn, and I am a sexual abuse victim, and I am also a survivor, and this is my story.
Morning, girls.
Good morning.
It's Thanksgiving morning.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Jenna Quinn was a child of innocence.
Love you, Mama.
I love you too, sweetheart.
Look at I'm giving this to Daddy,
Oh,
and I'm giving Daddy.
Greg, look what Jenna's brought.
A child of compassion.
And I got you some cool water. Daddy,
A child of love.
love you.
Love you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Greg Quinn, Daddy. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
But when Jenna turned 13, a family friend dragged her down the long, dark path of sexual abuse.
This is a death, a murder that takes place in silence. It's a quiet murdering of a person's spirit and soul and their very being, to the point where many victims take their own life. And that's the point that our daughter had come to.
I went to a private Christian school, and because of this, my parents believed that I would be protected, I would be in the safest environment possible, and they had high hopes. They put me in private school because they wanted me to attend chapel regularly, they wanted me in Bible class regularly, and I was doing very well. I was excelling in sports. I played basketball, I played volleyball. I was an honor roll student. I was who's who in sports and who's who in academics. And the fruits of their labor in putting me in private school was definitely paying off because I was doing so well in every area of my life. And then all of a sudden, we started to be friends with one of the coaches that was there. He coached off-season for the basketball team. And they were best friends with my parents. So his wife was best friends with my mother. My perpetrator was very, very close with my father. And not only that, they had an older son who I was best friends with. And my older sister was also best friends with his daughter, my perpetrator's daughter. So as you can see, the sibling relationships, they all lined up, and we ended up spending lots of time together during school activities as well as after school and in extracurricular activities as well. We even went on holiday trips together. We spent spring break, Thanksgiving, Christmas. They were basically family. And so little did my parents know that through their best efforts to protect me and give me the best education possible, the best biblical teaching possible, little did they know that I was being sexually abused starting at the age of 13 from this perpetrator, from this man who was my father's best friend. In my case, the verbal grooming started at age 12. Now, examples of verbal grooming are giving gifts, giving money, basically smooth talking and winning the child over to establish a one-on-one, dyadic, intimate relationship. So this happened for a year, and many times for victims, the verbal grooming is not enough to make an outcry about. So he would tell me about him and his wife and when they were dating, and so it kind of starts off very subtly in that manner, and he would ask me about, who are you dating, or are there any guys that you're interested in? Just personal information about my dating life that isn't too bizarre to say anything about, but at the same time, each act of verbal grooming got more and more invasive into my personal life, and it gets far enough to where it's embarrassing to say, oh, guess what, this perpetrator said, or guess what he said. So the verbal grooming part occurred for a year, and then the physical acts of sexual abuse occurred starting at age 13. He parked the car and he looked over at me and he said, you're a really special girl, you know that? And I was like, yeah, thanks, And he was like, you're so special. And then he reached over with his right hand and then he started rubbing me on my crotch. I was tormented at night. I couldn't sleep. I had insomnia.
And what was happening to her terrified her.
I was there. I know what it's like to be in the belly of hell.
Jenna had suffered years of sexual abuse at the hands of her father's best friend.
I wanted to kill him.
Upon the initial contact, I froze. It was shock and disbelief. I was paralyzed. I was absolutely paralyzed in fear because there's so many thoughts that run through your head. And of course, it occurred where it was just him and I, and there was nowhere really to go. After the first time, I was dropped off, at my house, at my parents' house, and I told myself that it didn't happen. I absolutely said, that didn't happen. It's not going to happen again. I'm sure it won't happen again. It couldn't possibly happen again. And I just minimized it and I suppressed it because of the relationship. I mean, in my mind, I thought, well, there's so many ramifications for if I were to tell. If I were to tell, then my father would lose his friend, my mother would lose her friend, I would lose my friend, my older sister would lose her friend, and, that's a lot. That's a big family dynamic. And so that's usually what perpetrators do is they prey on that relationship. That close relationship is a deposit for the child's silence because it's easier to tell anything. It's easier to disclose about a stranger than it is someone that you know. He certainly threatened me and told me that no one would believe me, they would never find any kind of evidence, and that it was our little secret and that I shouldn't say anything or else he would get in a lot of trouble. And he continued to make very strong verbal threats because he was a man of high status. He had a white-collar job, did very well in his community. He was even involved at his church that he attended. And so because of his status and his verbal threats, that was enough for me at 13 to be afraid. The sexual abuse occurred for 4 years and ended when I was 16, when I was able to have my own car and not go near him. I completely changed. My personality changed. I was always peppy. I was on homecoming corps every year in high school. And I've always been a very joyful, bubbly individual. I love people. And unfortunately, that's who perpetrators pick when they do pick their victims. So that personality completely changed. I started to be very introverted. I started wearing dark clothes. I had no interest in the opposite sex. I had a pretty cute little junior high boyfriend, at the time this initially started. And, immediately I broke up with my boyfriend, not really saying much, but didn't want anything to do with any kind of male figure. And so for years, I avoided men and I did not date. I had no healthy interest in the opposite sex. And much of that had to do with the fact that I didn't want to be loved. I didn't believe I could be loved. And I certainly, because I was struggling with loving myself, didn't want anyone to love me because I couldn't accept it. Many victims feel a false sense of shame and they're afraid to love themselves, and they feel as though they did something to bring about the abuse. And it's a false sense of shame. It's absolutely false. And that's exactly what the enemy wants you to believe. He wants you to believe that you're invaluable and that you're worthless and that you're not worth loving. And as long as that secret is kept silent and you don't speak out about what's happened, about the sexual abuse, as hard as it is, when it stays hidden, you start to believe those lies from the enemy, and you start to believe that, you are worthless and that you did bring it on. And the false sense of shame, breeds more isolation, and it breeds more fear, and it breeds more shame. And it's a cycle. Many perpetrators tell the victim that it is their fault, or they brainwash the victim, so to speak, and they tell the victim that, they wanted it and that they deserved it and that they were asking for it, which really, really impedes on the cognitive process for the victim. And so after hearing it and believing it and already feeling a false sense of shame, victims will begin to accept that as truth.
Jenna's odd behavior upset her parents deeply, but unaware of the horrors of sexual abuse, the Quinns could not spot the signs that are so typical in young abuse victims.
So many times we would ask ourselves, what's the matter with Jenna? Her personality began changing. She became more moody. She would have little outbursts of anger that were not typical of her personality. She became depressed. She had a terrible self-esteem. She felt she was ugly. And at first we felt, well, that's a typical junior high, early high school feeling for girls. But this was beyond. I knew that she truly believed she was ugly. We tried communicating with her as often as possible, lifting her up, building her up, trying to help her understand how beautiful she was. But none of it was working. And I remember one night it came to a head. It was the fall of her freshman year. She called me up to her room. And I went up and I just held her. And she said, "Mom, I have to show you something." And she showed me her ankle, where she had just cut herself.
Like many young victims, Jenna herself didn't know what was going on. She had minimized the abuse, told herself that it was no big deal, to the point where she could not connect her behavior and her pain with the abuse. All the while, Lynn Funk continued to abuse her.
He was like the assistant coach, and he was ordering the uniforms, and I went over there because he called my dad to say that the uniforms don't fit and that they're not the right size, just to get me over there to try them on. So I grab what I think is my size in the uniform. I go into the guest bathroom, I lock the door, and I try on the uniform, and the uniform's fine. It fits perfect. And then I came out, and he offered me alcohol, which wasn't the first time he had ever offered me alcohol. And I was like, no thanks. He had all this alcohol out, and then he started, he put in a porn tape, and I had never seen porn before in my life. And so I really didn't know what, I was just so shocked and so numb. I was really numb. I didn't even know what to think, because I wasn't thinking at all. I just froze.
And then, Funk forced himself on Jenna, robbing her of her innocence and damaging her soul.
He was like, it's okay. So I'm thinking it's okay in my head because he keeps telling me this.
Jenna's world became encased in sadness.
I was just feeling so lost, and I just felt like nobody could help me. I was basically gonna take my dad's gun and shoot myself.
She had it planned. She knew how she was going to do it. And she felt that way we would suffer in her loss, but that we wouldn't understand the depths of her true pain. And she would have gone to her grave with that secret. And he would have attended her funeral and not spoken a word.
At night, I would pray, God, just don't forget me. Just, do not forget me.
Those who loved Jenna could never forget her. But after 3 years of abuse, her pain had increased to the point where older sister Stephanie decided to have a heart-to-heart talk with her little sister. So on the day after Christmas, Stephanie took Jenna to lunch and asked her,
Jenna, I really want to know. I'm going to ask you something. Has anybody ever hurt you? And I waited for a response. And it didn't take but a few seconds, and she just started crying. I didn't feel it coming on. I just started crying. I said, Jenna, you have to tell me who's been doing this to you? And she said, I can't tell you. It's going to ruin everything. It's going to ruin it. And so I just said, Jenna, I got real serious with her, and I said, Jenna, you will tell me who this person is. Stephanie pulled all that information out of me and got me to say everything. That's when she said, it was Mr. Funk. And so I just was in shock.
That night, Stephanie called a family meeting.
We just sat close, leaning forward, not imagining what she would have to tell us. And then that's when Jenna finally told us that she was being hurt and that the person hurting her was Mr. Funk. Our response at that was shock and anger.
I had no idea what was coming. I had no idea.
And we were going to confront him in the presence of his wife about what he had been doing to my daughter.
I wanted to kill him.
What gave you the strength not to kill him?
My faith in God. Honestly, if I didn't have my faith in God, he wouldn't be here today. I felt like I was in prison. I felt like I had handcuffs on me because I couldn't do anything. I mean, I knew what I could do, and I dreamt about it and thought about it every day, but I couldn't do it because of my family and my faith.
The Quinns did the right thing by calling the police. After an investigation, Lynn Funk was arrested and charged with several counts of sexual contact with a child. After his trial, Funk was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison.
The pain doesn't go away even when you get justice. The healing part takes a long time. But we are healing. We're healing. It just takes a long time. It's a process. We have good days and we have bad days.
In the moment where I feel I have a flashback or, I'm feeling as though, I have blame and I have a false sense of shame, and that memory comes and it's strong and I'm feeling as though I'm a victim again, I, first of all, recognize it, because what I used to do is just suppress it immediately and minimize it. So the first thing is to recognize it for what it is, and usually that is a lie of the enemy. And from that point on, I just tell God directly. I tell him my thought. I say, Lord, this is how I'm feeling, because, thank goodness the Lord made us to feel. We have all of our emotions for a reason, and we're supposed to share our emotions with Christ. And for me, that has been where I've seen the most healing, is sharing, Father, I feel angry, and because I feel angry, I'm telling you that I feel angry. Help me with my anger. And before you know it, his peace is able to flood in. But it's giving him that authority, letting him be Lord in your life. And so for me, when I get those feelings, I know that it's from the enemy. And I just remember the verse in Isaiah that says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And I say, Father, I know that you have never left my side. I know that you've been with me every step of the way. and I thank you for giving me strength in this moment. I don't know where I would be if this had not have happened, but I know that because I gave it to the Lord, He's been able not only to make me stronger than I ever imagined I could be in my walk with Him and in my relationship with other people and in the boldness that I have, it's worked out for my benefit, and that's exactly what His Word promises us. His Word promises us that, He will turn things around and work it for our benefit.
I know some people are probably thinking, well, this is just great. It worked out for her, that's fine, but it's not going to work out for me. Well, that's not right at all. It will work out for you, but you need to get to that point where you want to make it right, where you want to come out. Just know that it's not your fault. You were picked.
These perpetrators, they choose their victims very carefully, and they only choose the ones that they feel like they can control, manipulate, scare, intimidate.
There was a violation of every part of your being, and you have nothing to be ashamed of. That's what they need to know. That's the first step in healing.
At the Children's Advocacy Center, it's a nonprofit organization where, victims of abuse, the families, the parents, anybody who's a victim can go and receive free counseling. So it's a great program. And I started to see 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, boys and girls that were much younger than me, who had been through horrible sexual abuse, and they couldn't even verbalize it. They didn't even have the language to say, this is what happened and it was wrong. And that really just broke my heart. From that point forward, we started to write the draft for Jenna's Law, which is a Texas state law that falls under the Texas Education Code, and it's House Bill 1114. And after about 1.5 years of just praying it through and being as diligent as we possibly could be with seeing this law through, the Austin State House, it was passed in 2009. And Jenna's Law, which bears my name, mandates that every parent, teacher, and student in the state of Texas is educated on the signs and the symptoms of child sexual abuse and other forms of child maltreatment. And before this law, no law like it in the education system existed in the United States. And I still am in shock that the law has passed, and I'm still blown away about all that God has done and will do, not just in my life, but in other victims' lives.